As a psychologist, a woman, a wife, and a mother, I am in the minority on the stage today. As I look around this audience, however, I think if I were to switch seats with you, I would not be in the minority, I would be in the majority. And I want to talk today a little bit not about marriage, not about family, but about your marriage and your family, the one you have or the one you hope to have, and about my marriage and my family. I have a dear friend named Susan. Susan apparently grew up in a family that did not happen in Greece or Singapore or whatever those other countries were that were all down at the bottom of the list there in terms of fertility and marriage. She grew up in 18th century United States, from the sound of things. Very large family of 9 children, and a very stable family that was never marred by divorce. Susan loved her parents. She described her mother as the best person she'd ever known. They kept their problems dutifully behind closed doors, as we know good parents are supposed to do. But somehow, something went wrong. And among all of Susan's many siblings, 5 were divorced. 3 never thought about marriage at all, never chose to marry. And Susan was left seriously contemplating whether her marriage was worth saving. It's curious that in this very stable marriage, somehow Susan's parents didn't find a way to communicate to their children the skills and the attitudes that are necessary to not just have a stable marriage, but a soul-satisfying one. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit today, because I grew up in a home in some ways a little like Susan's. My parents were also in a stable relationship, but as a child listening to them argue behind those closed doors, I often prayed and prayed that they would not divorce. Then when I got to be an adolescent, I sometimes prayed that they would. I knew my parents loved me, but it was hard to watch them as they struggled with each other, plowing through their 60 years of married life. Sociologists still find, as we've already learned today, that a big majority of young people today do want to marry. They value marriage and they expect their marriages to last, and that's good. Because married adults tend to be healthier, they tend to be happier. They tend to live longer. They tend to be more economically well off. They even have more sex and better sex than their single counterparts, according to their own descriptions at least. Children whose parents marry are less likely to grow up in poverty. They're less likely to have children out of wedlock, and they're less likely to divorce themselves. But it's pretty clear that just being married or staying married is not enough to produce these positive outcomes. And sometimes I think we don't pound the pulpit enough about what it takes to have a satisfying and happy marriage, not just a non-divorced one. So helping people expect and navigate the predictable stages of marriage, I think, is an important thing to help us grow up through marriage, not just grow old through marriage. Today I want to talk about 4 of those stages. These stages are descriptions, not prescriptions. I'm not saying you must go through every one of these stages, but it's not a problem if we do. It's not unusual if we do. This is how long-term committed relationships unfold. And if you're not married right now, and maybe you don't want to be, or maybe you don't have that opportunity, these stages also unfold in our relationships with siblings, with parents, with our own children, with close friends. I think they even unfold in our relationship with God. So these are other ways you might apply what we're going to talk about for a minute. The first stage is the honeymoon stage. This is the I love everything about my little snuggles stage, right? The one where we're just so happy that someone who we choose would choose us in turn. And this flood of hormones kicks in to support this wonderful, happy, attaching stage where we choose another person to replace our parents as our primary attachment bond. And we find instead this marital bond to be the place where we feel safe enough to go explore the world, to grow up, to feel cherished and understood. What's more, we also fall in love with ourselves a little more during this particular stage of marriage. We feel a little nobler and a little better. It's just a little easier, isn't it, to be loving and kind and generous. We're just sort of magically transformed ourselves into someone who's just so dang loving. And that's a wonderful part of life. To be sure, some of us don't ever get to this stage. We don't get to that honeymoon stage at all because we've had so many past disappointments or betrayals or losses that it just doesn't seem worth it, is usually the reason. We've been burned. We've watched people we love get burned. And we're afraid to really be vulnerable for fear of getting burned again. Even those of us who marry can bring a deep and sometimes unconscious fear of that kind of vulnerability to our relationship. We get over it by falling oh so in love, but then that fear of vulnerability comes back. The fear of being made to feel ashamed of who we are comes back. So instead of working on trying to figure out how to tolerate vulnerability more courageously, we just try to avoid it by not getting too close. When closeness does scare us, we may want a dramatic, unalterable demonstration of someone else's trustworthiness before we're willing to commit to that other person. Or believing that we may have finally found the one person in the world whose love will magically transform us without us having to work at it very hard at all. We may commit too much too fast, only to withdraw in fury and blame when the other person turns out to be just an ordinary, flawed human being with needs of their own, instead of someone who exists on earth to help us be happy. Now, a little realism is the best antidote to disappointment, and that includes in the honeymoon stage. The most happy people in the long term in marriage are those who are the most realistic about their fiancé or their early partner, their early marriage partner's flaws, not just the person who sees with rose-colored glasses. In order to commit to marriage, then, we have to make peace with the fact that vulnerability does not have to be shaming, and that love is worth the risk, whether or not we succeed. And we have no guarantee on that fact. But even if we make it to the honeymoon stage of marriage, it doesn't last forever. And that can be rather disconcerting to us to find out. So let me just put you on warning. If you haven't yet reached this stage, you will not stay there for the rest of your life, no matter what you do. Those of you who are married, do I have any concurrence that you would find that stage does in fact, yes, thank you. So, within days or years, the I love everything about my little snuggles stage of marriage gives way to the I love you, but stage of marriage, also known as the power struggle. Here we begin to realize that the person we married has a lot of really weird habits. They have these strange little rules about how you're supposed to do life. They don't share all of our goals and values completely, after all. In fact, they don't even really know who's supposed to do the laundry and what constitutes fun. So we hit these problems. Sometimes we work things out. We realize that we married a reasonable person after all, and we sigh a sigh of relief. And sometimes we're relieved, but the problem then returns, or a new one develops, or we're mad all over again. And we suddenly change into this person who isn't just so dang loving, but who is uncharacteristically cranky. which must be someone else's fault. Maybe we just aren't compatible after all. Oddly enough, marital therapist Harville Hendricks has pointed out that all of us marry someone with whom we are inherently incompatible. Does that make you feel any better? But that this is precisely what pushes us to our growing edge. Most of us didn't sign up for marriage, however, just to stand precariously on our growing edge. You know, that's not really a very comfortable feeling. We want something we can count on, not something that pushes us. But change and growth are the meat and potatoes of married life. They are what prepare us for a more enduring and genuine intimacy than the honeymoon stage can provide. So what do we need to do at the power struggle stage? Well, researchers Notarius and Markman tell us that the single most important factor in a successful marriage is not how well we communicate, not even how compatible our goals are, but how well we do at solving problems together. Easy peasy, right? So we get out our good reflective listening skills and we ask more clearly for what we need, and we just keep on doing what we've always been doing to get our way, only somehow it doesn't work with this person the way it worked in the past. And we get really confused. Marital researcher John Gottman points out that marital problems fall into two categories: problems we can solve and problems we can't solve. Problems we can solve, like he likes to watch football, I like Dancing with the Stars, but we can afford two TVs, so no problem. Problems we can't solve, like I want children and she doesn't. And how are we going to get through this? So let's play a little game. What percent of problems in long-term, successful, committed relationships are ultimately unsolvable problems? Would you think of a number in your head? What percent are ultimately unsolvable problems? So what's the answer? Gottman's research on successful, again, long-standing, committed relationship marriages concludes that 69% of marital problems never get fully resolved. Now that's either the best news I've ever heard or really discouraging. But at least it tells me my marriage is normal after all. We do even a little better, maybe, than 69% of our problems never getting solved. Gottman says these unsolvable problems are like trichines or asthma. They come and go in importance, but they never just go away. We have to learn to cope with them as best we can. So if we think the goal is to solve the problems, we get really discouraged. But if that isn't the goal, if the goal is to look at the unsolvable with a better sense of humor, with more compassion and charity, with more curiosity about how our spouse got to be the way they are, which is really a mystery. If that's the goal, to claim our power without being overpowering, to be willing to apologize and forgive, what if the goal is to grow? Then we move forward. So how do we do those things? We start softly, first of all. Gottman reminds us that avoiding problems doesn't help, and starting a conversation with blame or criticism is just asking for defensiveness and trouble. When a problem comes up for a couple I know, they have a little buzzword between them. One of them quietly says to the other one, "So how open-minded are you feeling?" Which is their little, tagline for, we gotta talk, but I'm putting you on notice so you can get yourself to a calm, centered place where we can do this with committed civility that we learned about this morning, I think, from Pastor Johnson. I loved his term. Shame researcher Brene Brown finds it helpful when discussing a problem to say, the story I'm making up in my head about this is that you don't care about me, that you don't love our children, that you think I'm fat, that it will never be my turn, whatever it is. The story I'm making up in my head about this is takes a lot of maturity and self-reflection to get to. A lot of awareness that what I'm making up in my head may or may not be what's in your head at all. But unfortunately, after doing all this work, we may still be really stuck where we can't move forward and we don't know how to change. The I love you but stage gradually can move to the, what was your name again? Stage of marriage, also known as the distancing stage. In this stage of marriage, I may just plain give up on closeness or growth. I may stay because my husband isn't as wacko as my friend's husband, or because I don't want to hurt the kids, or because, I don't want the stigma, but I'm surviving. I'm not thriving, and I'm wondering if it's worth it. Even if I'm not hitting divorce or thinking about divorce, I may hit circumstances that require me to be more independent for a time. A client of mine hit this stage a few years ago when he began to realize that his daughter was attracted to women and not men. When he approached his wife about his observations, she, coming from a very conservative background, was absolutely horrified and ashamed. She basically said, "Do not talk to me about this. I cannot deal with this. If you need to talk to somebody about this, you go find somebody else, but not our pastor, and not our family, and not our friends, and not me. I can't do this." It was 2 years before they were able to begin a real dialogue about this tender topic. In the meantime, he felt abandoned and alone with this challenge, and so did she, I suspect, and so, I suspect, did their sweet daughter. As much as they valued unity and closeness as a family, they each had to grow up on separate paths for a while. But grow up they did, and eventually they came back and began to talk and to reinvest in the unity and strength in their family that meant so much to them. Now, you may have gotten to that distancing stage despite all that you tried, and the relationship may have ended, and sometimes I believe that is for the best. But even if you stay together, this can be a lonely stage. But if both partners are willing to use times of distance to get better at tolerating independence without giving up on each other, to continue to invest and to try, they can start to give up on what my friend Nancy calls the Hollywood version of our lives and start to invest in something that lasts beyond the credits scroll. Yes, it stings to find out that your kids aren't perfect and your spouse isn't Santa Claus, delivering unconditional gifts of adoration without you having to do anything for it. But this is also where we find out that the magic of Christmas morning was created by ordinary people, sacrificing and creating together for those they loved something that is a little magical after all. If we keep trying, through the power struggles and the distances, they gradually help us to not just give up or grow up, but grow. Becoming not just more loving, but more charitable, more connected and more independent, more honest and more kind. We move toward stage 4, which is acceptance and renewal. Moving into this stage is often pretty undramatic. It can start with sort of, "All right, I ungive up on you." But it expands if we keep investing into a deeper curiosity about this real human being whose dreams and heartaches and fears become precious to us, and whose values and goodness, though different from our own, we deeply value and respect. The problems don't get all solved, but we learn to keep working at them with more humor and an open mind. We choose to apologize and we choose to forgive both the other and ourselves. And we drop the blame and shame that don't push anyone to change, but only to hide. But we don't get to this stage of real, committed, mature love by jumping ship at the power struggle or the distance and starting over with someone new in the honeymoon stage, because it does not last for anyone ever. It's a fundamental tenet of my faith that marriages and families can endure forever. that God teaches us the value of family from the moment he declares himself to us as a father. But as my friend Susan and I have learned, love worth perpetuating is not something we fall into, but something we climb toward. Every problem we resolve or endure or learn to laugh about is like a drop of glue holding us together, eventually creating something more powerful and transforming than even new love. But we have to hold on for the whole ride. My engagement gift from my husband Dave was a little necklace with a boy and a girl giving their hearts to each other and saying in French, plus que hier, moins que demain, which means more than yesterday, less than tomorrow. Having watched my parents' marriage just get worse and worse with time, the idea of being loved more and more, just as I was, thrilled me to the core. But it took a long time to realize that what I was really signing up for in marriage was to become more and more trustworthy with someone else's heart, not just more and more safe and adored. I'm very grateful for my parents' stable marriage, but having just celebrated my 40th wedding anniversary, I'm so grateful that the skills and attitudes of a soul-satisfying marriage are not just something I did or did not inherit from whoever happened to raise me, but something Dave and I can learn and claim for ourselves, that we cannot just grow old together, but grow up together. Thank you.